Now, tomorrow, nurses will walk out again in England and they'll be joined by many other NHS workers in what will be the biggest strike in the history of the health service. In Wales, though, there's been a glimmer of a deal and the strike has been put on pause. So what's really going on? We can talk to the leader of the Unite Union, which represents many of the NHS staff, Sharon Graham, who's in Cardiff, where there have been talks this weekend. Thanks so much for being with us this morning, Sharon.
Thank you.
I want to put to you, first of all, what is going on in Wales? There are some unions that have paused the strikes. Why won't you do the same?
Well, look, I'm in Wales and I have been all weekend trying to get to the deal that we need to give to our members to solve the dispute. We're not there yet. The reality is we are not there yet. What we needs to happen now is for Wales to come back to the table, which I'm meeting the Health Minister later on today, in order for us to see if we can get a deal. But I think the important thing, Laura, to say is it's in stark contrast, Scotland and Wales, to what is happening in England. And I've just heard the interview with Grant Shapps. It's the eve of the biggest NHS strike in our history, and he has absolutely nothing to say about it. Where is Rishi Sunak? Why is he not at the negotiating table? That's where he should be, and that's what we're calling on him to do.
He did have something to say, though, to our viewers. He said that you are putting lives at risk and patients will be harmed by your decision to walk out.
Well, this government is putting lives at risk. And let me just give you a stat. 500 people are dying every single week. 500 waiting for an ambulance. So what we're trying to do is that we are trying to, yes, get pay, of course, because we need to solve the workforce crisis, but we're also trying to make sure that patients are much safer than what they are. It's almost like there's a strike in the NHS every single day. We've got 130,000 vacancies. So we're doing our very best to try and solve this dispute, but it's going to take more than that. It's going to take investment in the NHS also.
The NHS in England, though, does actually dispute that figure, just to make that clear to our viewers. But isn't the state of play and just how desperate and sometimes dangerous things are, isn't that exactly the reason why walking out is actually going to put patients in even more peril?
Well, actually, again, listening to Grant Shapps, I mean, I haven't used this word so much about politicians, I don't think, ever in 30 years, but he's actually lying. The idea that he is saying that ambulance workers did not do minimum cover in the dispute is an absolute, utter lie. And it's important that we rectify that this morning. That is not true. What we are doing is that we, of course, are making things as safe as possible. And you can look at our stats to show that that has happened. But on a daily basis, this government is putting people's lives at risk. We've got 500 people dying in a single week just waiting for ambulances, and that's outside other pieces. They need to come to the table. Where is Rishi Sunak? This is either because this man is out of his depth, he doesn't know what he's doing, or there's a much more sinister reason as to why they are doing this to the NHS.
But Sharon Graham, I'm sure Grant Shapps, who's not now here to respond to your claim that he's actually lying about what's going on, but that's a very serious charge. But I just want to say to you, our viewers this morning will have heard Grant Shapps being disparaging about the unions. They'll now hear you being disparaging about the government. Surely both sides could do the public a favour, cool things down and sort it out. What are you doing to actually try and make that happen?
Well, look, it's really difficult. Laura, in 30 years of negotiating, I've never seen such an abdication of responsibility in my entire life. Rishi Sunak is the CEO of UK PLC. We are trying to sit down with him and do a negotiation. It's very difficult to do a negotiation to solve a dispute like this if they won't even come to the table. They won't even come to the table. We've wrote to them, we've asked them to say, come to the table. We are willing to look at solutions in relation to this.
So
the money is there.
Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, has said that there is dialogue going on. Is he not telling the truth?
He's not telling the truth, Laura. I can tell you categorically that there has been no conversations on pay whatsoever with Rishi Sunak or Stephen Barclay about this dispute in any way, shape or form. They've danced around their handbag, danced around the edges, but they will not talk about pay. And to me, that is an abdication of responsibility. The dispute is about pay. So how can they say they're in talks? Talks about what? What are they in talks about?
But are there talks at other levels? Sharon Graham, are there other talks at other levels with other ministers or government officials? Or are you telling our audience this morning that on the eve of the biggest health strike in history, there is zero conversation between anyone in your union and anyone at all speaking for the government?
I can absolutely categorically tell you that. I had the General Secretaries in a conversation with me last week. In fact, we were watching your programme one morning thinking, have we all missed an email? What talks are they talking about? I can categorically say to you, we are in no talks at any level whatsoever with the government about pay in the NHS. And that is a real abdication of responsibility. Why is Rishi Sunak not coming to the table? Instead of doing, sort of press sort of conferences about other things, come and negotiate. Roll your sleeves up and negotiate on the pay in the NHS. That's what's required.
OK, we'll see what happens in the coming days and whether there is anything in the very last minute that could stop these strikes happening. But it doesn't sound like it from listening to you and Grant Shapps this morning. Let's talk about the Labour Party. Now, our viewers who might not be familiar with union relations, Your Union Unite is the biggest and has an official tie and affiliation with the Labour Party. But in July, you said there's no point giving money to a party that is basically sticking two fingers up to workers. It's almost like an abusive relationship. Now, that's very strong language. Do you still feel that way?
Well, look, what I'd say to you, Laura, is that obviously I would prefer a Labour government. Of course I would. They will do better on workers. We would not have some of the things going on. I believe they would be at the table negotiating on pay. So that is really clear. But it is OK also to be critical. And I do think that Labour needs to come out and say that they would make different choices. Make choices on these profiteering companies. We cannot put this country through austerity Mark II again. Why is it OK to say to workers to take the pay of the crisis, but it's not OK to say that profiteering companies should pay for the crisis? And what I want Labour to do is to clearly say they choose that direction rather than plummeting us again into a lighter austerity.
And when you hear Rachel Reeves or Keir Starmer in this chair next to me say things like, we may not be able to do good Labour things as quickly as we would like, do you interpret that as what you described as austerity light?
Well, look, what I'd say, and I've said this figure to Keir Starmer and I've said it before, is that if you take energy, there's £170 billion of excess profit from the leaked Treasury report, excess profit in energy. Why can't we have 50 billion of that and effectively deal with the black hole if it's there, the 40 billion? You'd have 6 billion to give every NHS worker 10% pay rise, and you'd have money left over. Why is that choice so abhorrent? Why is that not the choice that you would take? But you'd rather take the choice of saying that actually everyone's going to have to pull in their belts. It's totally unacceptable for workers and communities in this country to pay for this crisis whilst there's rampant profiteering going on.
I know you've said very carefully you would prepare a Labour government. You were very clear about that. But you do sound frustrated with the Labour leadership's stance and the repeated occasions on which they say, oh, we won't write big cheques, we'll be very, very careful with the public finances. I mean, are you frustrated, and do you still believe that their choices suggest they are, to use your phrase, sticking two fingers up to workers?
Well, look, I think it's really important that the workers' voice is heard. I'm going to make sure that I use every breath that I have to make sure that we have the workers' voice heard. Labour is in Parliament to be the workers' voice in Parliament, and I want them to use that voice in a much louder way than they are. I do think this word of choices is very important. In 2023, the big question is going to be who pays? Who pays for this crisis? And at the moment, I don't see anyone saying that it shouldn't be workers and communities. All I'm hearing is that it should be, we've got to tighten our belts and people have got to be careful, etc. Why is that allowed to happen when you've got rampant profiteering going on, which, by the way, is attributing to inflation? Why can't the choice be that we look at those profiteering organisations and we ask them to pay their bit in a much more detailed way than what we've been?
And briefly, there's another choice for the Labour Party, Sharon, and we don't have much time, but I just wonder if I can ask you very quickly. There's another voice on the left, Jeremy Corbyn, the former Labour leader. He still wants to stand as a Labour candidate in his current seat. The party at the moment is saying that he shouldn't stand. Should he be allowed to run as a Labour MP? Would you like to see that?
Well, look, Jeremy Corbyn is a Labour MP. The party has gone through an investigation in inverted commas. It's clear he's a Labour MP. And, of course, I think that if he stood in his constituency, he'd win, actually. I think he probably would win in relation to that. So rather than creating barriers, why don't we try and bring people together? But whether it's Jeremy Corbyn or Keir Starmer or somebody else, the key thing here now for this country is who pays for this crisis. And unless we get some different choices, it will be workers who pay again.
OK, Sharon Graham, thank you so much for coming on the programme from Cardiff. It's great to